Can you say anything you want? That's what today's podcast is about.
Yeah, my wife just asked, do you ever think about losing that weight? And, think about it all the time.
The Glenn Gower podcast start right now, baby. Hey, welcome to the Glenn Gower podcast, the best podcast you'll listen to all day. Sponsored by Mission Blueprint.
So, what does that mean to say what you want?
Are you free to say whatever you want, or do you have a responsibility to say what comes out of your mouth?
Well, I think we all have to function with a filter, don't we? Like, we just can't walk down the street and when we see somebody with blue hair, go, "You idiot, stop dyeing your hair."
Yeah, what's the matter with you, the blue hair? Right. Unless, of course, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the old ladies in the church when they dye their hair, and somehow there is a tint of blue, which is funny. My good friend from Rapid City calls them the blue hairs, and it's so funny. Maybe the blue hairs will show up. But this podcast is about, do you have the freedom to say whatever you want, whenever you want? And it's actually more, it goes further than that. Do you have the ability to read whatever you want? Not the ability, do you have the right to read, to view whatever you want, right? So, what say you?
They say that's the cost of freedom, right? Like, to be free means it's free for everybody. Like, I can't put a restriction on what you choose to read or what you choose to put in your body or how you choose to spend your time. If I do, now I'm censoring you. Now I'm controlling you. Now I'm guiding you. And isn't that the opposite of freedom?
No, it's not.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, what does our First Amendment say? Do we have isn't that freedom of speech?
Yeah, it's freedom of speech.
That's right. So in this country, we have what is called freedom of speech, which means what? What does it actually mean? Can we say whatever we want to say?
We're supposed to be able to. You can go take a soapbox and stand down on Highway 14 and yell at the semis as they're coming into the soybean plant. Or go and stand in front of I think the rules are, because we've gotten politics involved in this, you can stand in a public place, on public roadways or public access points. You can't I can't come stand in your yard and scream at you.
Yeah, there would be some limitations. I mean,
right.
You don't want to go up the elevator and start screaming whatever you want. There has to be some sort of order here.
So when I took my son to Washington, D.C. last year, and we went around the Capitol and we went around the White House and we did all the things. On the north side, by the north gates of the White House, there's a fairly large open space park, and then there's a pretty big perimeter fence around the White House itself. And there was a gentleman there on a step stool without a shirt on and had a portable microphone system, and he was reading from the dark text.
I've never heard of that. What's the dark text?
It's like the Devil's Bible.
Oh, yeah, I've heard. I mean, Nefarious had at the very end of it.
Yeah,
spoiler alert if you want to watch the show, which you should watch Nefarious. But it had that.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it was anti-Christian, but he was just there with his little boombox, and he could do that because it was a public place. It was Washington, D.C., and you're allowed to have a boombox. And then down the street were a group of Christians, and they were saying their piece.
Yeah, one of the problems in this country, ladies and gentlemen, I think, is that we have no idea what philosophy is. We don't really know because we weren't raised and searching for the truth. Because if you go back to the grades, and even before Socrates, like even Thales, going back to the grades, I'm not a philosopher, but I got boys who study and they teach me all the time. But anyway, in college, when we learned philosophy, it was always about being a truth speaker. No matter what, you search for what is true. And the problem with the right to say anything you want means it could be true or it might not be true, and it doesn't matter because you have that right. Mm-hmm. So what has happened is there's been a divorce between rights and responsibilities. Now, let's go back to the video clip you showed me. Is there a way to show them that video clip? Can we download it and show them?
Oh, of course. You could do a screen capture and include that with the podcast.
Is that legal?
Yeah,
Not
that's a
sure,
great
but
question.
I could for sure, ladies and gentlemen. I'll put a link in the notes. But
I'll look into it.
there was a school board meeting.
There was a school board meeting
Tell
in
us what
Brookings.
happened.
So on September 11th, which we can for sure include in the soap note or the show notes below, on September 11th, the Brookings Public School had their just bi-monthly school board meeting, and Marty Jackley has signed a letter supporting a group out there that is banning certain books from public schools. And he believes he's got a whole bit on Kellerland about why he signed this letter. And there's a movement within the state of South Dakota and regionally that certain books just should be excluded from the public library. And to the point that the previous board meeting before that, someone had stood up and read excerpts out of one of the books that is questioned to be banned. And the board president read a disclaimer that said, due to FCC rules, we can't read this stuff on a live video that's going out broadcast because that violates FCC transmission laws. And so there was this big uproar of which books were going to be banned and which ones should be, or should they not be banned. And it was a big fight over freedom of press and freedom of what should be accessible to our students in the public school, because it's public.
What does public mean? Public means you chain God up and do whatever you want. Okay,
Well, one
I
of the
know
books they
maybe-
want to buy is the Bible.
Yeah, of course. And I know that it doesn't mean that literally, ladies and gentlemen, but that's really what has happened. I mean, if you go back in time, I don't know what year was it, 1970, 72, where they banned prayer. Mm-hmm. And if you do look at the statistics, ladies and gentlemen, when they banned prayer, you could see immorality just begin to climb slowly over the years. It just went like this. And this is what happens when we take God out of our school, out of our daily lives. Mm-hmm. And I want to do a podcast on sometime, can Christians send their kids to public school?
Can they or should they?
Well, are they allowed to by our Christian faith?
Oh, sure. That's an interesting question.
Yes, because you might be surprised what we have to say on that. But getting back to this idea of we've divorced rights and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a question here. I mean, last week you said, so can we have Playboy in the schools?
Yeah, Hustler and Playboy. Let's go.
I mean, can you have pornographic videos?
Well, they aren't books, but I mean, some of the books are pretty pornographic.
Okay, how about, some of the books.
Yeah, some of the books are very pornographic.
I mean, where does it end? And how do you make a distinction between what is good and what isn't good?
Well, that's our job.
It is our job.
That's our job as parents to be involved. But the big thing that everyone who is sending their kids to public school realizes is getting access to the school to see your children is really difficult. And most parents don't challenge the system because they're busy working. They aren't there going to have lunch with their kids. They aren't going to have a seat in the classroom and watch those teachers teach their children. There's just a assumed, they're teaching the children the way we were taught. They haven't changed anything. And the truth of the matter is the public education system has changed dramatically.
Since 1988, for sure.
Oh, even in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Children now that are sugared up, wired up, ADD, ADHD, they don't have chairs anymore. They have cushions. They have bouncy balls to sit on. They have fidget spinners to play with. Because there is an awakening that not all children learn the same way. But some of the environments can be really, really distracting, where some can be really, really supportive. It just kind of depends what customization your child needs to learn best. And it's an ironic term, mass customization. We have this end goal of everybody needs to know this information, but how your 4 children will learn all of this information is going to look wildly different from point A to point B. but we're going to traverse the same information. They're just going to learn it differently.
Yeah, I mean, at some point you have to do something, and there has to be some sort of road that you follow, some plan. And I'm not opposed to testing, but ladies and gentlemen, when your high school student cannot read or write, and they somehow get graduated, they get a certificate, there's a huge problem. And not only reading and writing, it's basic thinking skills. They cannot reason. And so our school systems, they're factories to put people out to just work and not think for themselves.
Right. Well, that goes back to Dale Carnegie and
Mr. Rockefeller.
Rockefeller, 1902, the establishment of the public school board. It wasn't even the Department of Education. It was just the public school board, $30 million endowment back then. And their mission was to create a culture of workers because it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. They needed people to sit in a row and begin manufacturing and do their part. And prior to 1900, the majority of education was done in homes or small little country schools with 3 or 4 families. And it wasn't until there was a decision to centralize this goal of what our city state needed that we changed we created what public school is.
Yeah, that's so true. Listen, we should do a podcast just on public school systems and just look at the raw data. But ladies and gentlemen, there's a problem. Just look at our kids. Just look at them. I mean, they
try to interact with them
and try to talk to them. And when's the last time a public schooler said, "Yes, ma'am," "Yes, sir," or called you by Mr. Gower, right? It's a very odd thing when we have these school systems and people cannot think for themselves. And that's true. Just if have conversations with high school students and you tell them something and they don't process it, they'll say, "I don't believe that. I don't believe that." "Well, why don't you believe it?" "I just don't believe it." "Okay, but give me a couple, 1, 2, 3 reasons, something concrete that you would say, no, it's not right because of these 3 things." "No, I just don't believe it." See, they refuse to tap into their intellect because it maybe never really has been tapped into.
It's never been fostered, grown, or nurtured.
And of course, you have those students that can think. You're going to always have that. And that's primarily, I think, because mom and dad at home have good conversations and they teach them how to think. But this podcast is really about, do we have the right to say whatever we want? Now, I know you're not a Catholic boy, but Protestants, the Pope is still your Pope. See, I don't think
Pope on a rope.
I don't think y'all know that, but he's the Pope of the Christian Church. And you might find this surprising. In his encyclical, Mirari Vos, I probably screwed that, Pope Gregory
Vos.
Pope Gregory the 16th said he condemned the idea of liberalism. He viewed freedom of conscience as a false and absurd concept. It says it's indeed a mad delusion. So he says these ideas of the liberal ideas of saying anything you want, doing anything, you're completely free, is absurd because how can we be completely free? Unless, of course, you just want to go to hell.
Well, Adam and Eve tried that.
It didn't work so good.
Well, no, it kind of screwed the rest of us.
It certainly did. So at some point, we have to say, okay, is liberalism actually working? This concept of you're free to do whatever you want. And I would say if you look at our world today, the answer is probably no. It's not working.
But if that idea of liberalism, you can read what you want, you can have whatever you want, and where does that line end? Well, I'm not going to obey the speed limit because I want to drive as fast as I want to drive. Where do boundaries begin and end if we can't even have a simple conversation about what, as a culture, as a society, we deem as appropriate, just like we agree on a speed limit? Can we agree that this content is not appropriate for this age group of developing people?
Yeah. And I think the answer is, what does our tradition tell us? And what does our book, the Bible, say? You and I have the same book. You've taken some out of yours, although you say the other way around. Doesn't matter because we have enough key books that would say you cannot support evil.
No.
You cannot.
That's the battle.
And evil does not have rights, ladies and gentlemen. This was posed in my morality class. Let's say you're going to this abortion speaker, and in this particular audience, there was a petition going around to further this law, which furthers abortion. And the petition comes into your hands. What do you do with it?
Tear it up.
Can you tear it up? Do you have the right to tear it up? And so we had this dialogue in our class. What do you do? Well, you can't tear it up. It's not your property. And so finally, the teacher came in and said, came into the conversation, said, since evil doesn't have rights, you take that paper and you take it to the bathroom and you rip it up and throw it in the garbage can. Mm-hmm. And this is where it's at. Evil does not have rights. So what is evil? Look at our tradition. Is a pornographic magazine evil?
Of course, it's a gateway. It's a gateway away from Christ.
How about pornographic books evil?
Yes.
Right? How about books that distort the truth?
Yes.
Is that evil?
Mm-hmm.
So then we're into censorship, you and I.
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Because evil doesn't have rights. And so good for Marty Jackley. I'd have to take a closer look at what he's condemning. Mm-hmm. But you cannot say evil has rights. We don't have the right to say our kids should be reading these transgender books because it's evil in of itself. They're intrinsically evil. Therefore, they don't have a right.
One of the top 50 books that they're trying to exclude from the public school system's library is "And Tango Makes Three." And
What's that?
It's from New York City. Two chinstrap penguin males develop a relationship at the New York Central Zoo, and they are kicking around this rock, and they're treating this rock like it's an egg. So the zookeeper just gave them their own egg because they hatched this egg, and so they've written this whole pseudo story around. Mm-hmm. Well, see, two men can raise a penguin, or two boy penguins can raise a penguin.
Yeah, that stuff's everywhere.
But that's in a children's
That's right.
book as a drawn out, what do you call that? Like
some kind of long story form? Or...
Yeah, a picture book.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's got few words but lots of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to tell you, my book that I read is the revised version with 1895, revised version with Apocryphy 1885.
That's your Bible?
That's my Bible.
The Revised Standard Version?
Mm-mm.
Just the revised version?
Yeah, revised version 1895.
Yeah.
You would not believe how much language has been excluded from the revised version to 1895. 1895 has a lot more words and a lot more verses in than the new ones do.
Yeah, in some ways, somebody got a hold of the text of the Bible and...
is constantly manipulating.
Yes, and it's very, very bizarre. Pope Pius IX, he branded freedom of the press and freedom of association as intrinsically evil. So what is something that's intrinsically evil? It's evil in of itself. You can never participate with an intrinsic evil, like murder. Murder is always wrong. Murder is different than killing, right? Killing isn't always wrong because you can defend yourself, but murder is always wrong. Abortion is always wrong, okay? These are intrinsic evils. So he said, Pope Pius IX, freedom of the press and freedom of association as intrinsically evil. That's strong language.
Mm-hmm.
And why did he say that? He goes on to say that freedom of the press is evil because you can say whatever you want. You can say things that aren't true, which is breaking a commandment. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever thought about what the 8th commandment is, bearing false witness?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have freedom of the press, you're free to write truth and false. And you're not, you don't have a right to do that, what the Pope is saying.
But you see an acceleration of this in our timeline. My wife and I just talked a bit about this, how Dan Rather was revered as a newscaster and an anchor man. He went to Afghanistan and he walked and he broadcast the struggles that were really happening there when they were fighting the Russians. And we used to hang on news anchors' credibility because of their integrity. And now anybody with a microphone and a good enough ability to share and market themselves, even if it's a minority viewpoint, can look like they're right. Because you can take someone who has all the authority and someone who has very, very minimal impact, but because you can put them on the same stage, and we call that social media or YouTube or Instagram, whatever, now they both look like authorities. And that line of defining who and what authority is defined by likes and followers, not by a consensus of intellectually driven, common focused people.
Right.
We pledge allegiance to the flag for the republic for which it stands. Do we really do that? Is that something that we do? Or is there a whole lot of authority out there with a really, really broad false witness to what our country stands for and what we as a culture and society really function? Or are we getting really confused about what our purpose and function is?
I think we're getting pretty confused.
But they're doing a great job of it. And I don't know who is, but something is.
Yeah. What's interesting about the silence is, for whatever reason, the Catholic bishops in this country have become pretty silent these last several years. You know, you had a Bruskowitz, or you had, I can't remember the cardinal in New York, good man. They would say things, say truth, and now we have a Bishop Strickland who's in Austin, Texas. He's being suppressed, maybe even by the Holy Father, and so he's the only one that's speaking out. And so it's very strange. Like in the Catholic world, there seems to be either a suppression, but there is lots of silence, and it's really, really bizarre. And I think there's a lot of confusion amongst the Catholic world. So it's a very interesting circumstance we find ourselves in. How do you discern what is true, right? I'm going to do a podcast, either I or we are going to do a podcast on how do you discern what is true. I give a presentation a year and a half ago at SDSU. The local chaplain said, hey, would you come in and give a presentation? And I called it from the prophetic. How did I call that? But it was about discerning what we take in, and how do you know if something is true or not. And the best way to know if something is true is to really live out your Christianity, because as Christians we have God in us, and there is a gift called discernment of spirits, and you could discern generally. I don't know say generally, but you could discern what is true and what isn't true. And you can test things. And one of the ways you test things is it does it follow the Bible, and is it part of our tradition? You know, is it part of your Lutheran tradition? So there's ways we can test things. But I'm here to tell you today, ladies and gentlemen, evil does not have rights.
Good.
So going back to that school board, that gentleman who got up and wants all this smut in, he's wrong. And he will be held accountable before God. And that's just it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you realize that you and I will be in the judgment seat. Not in the judgment seat. We won't be in the judgment seat, but Jesus will be in the judgment seat, and we'll be judged by what we do and what we do not do. It's both. And if you, ladies and gentlemen, are quiet while your school systems are putting this smut and into their curriculums, and your children are breathing this in, taking this in, you are going to be held accountable. Not just the teachers and the school board, but you for allowing that to happen. Because parents, you are the primary educators of your kids.
That's your job.
That's your job. And if you say, well, I can't I have to send them to the public school systems, and they're the primary educators. No, you are. You're in charge of their education. And the silver lining with COVID is a lot of parents began to wake up to see what was really going on in the school system.
Right. And that's where we're at with, you might be busy. Yeah, you might be working 2 jobs to pay for the boat and the house and the cars and the Xboxes and the TVs in every room. And pause a minute and go, because these are all education points, right? We are constantly teaching our children what to value, what's important in life, what matters today. And I saw a meme here on social media the other day, and it was just like hit me hard of this note from children to their parents. And it was a 9-year-old. I asked Dad why he always talked to the dog. And Dad replied, the dog can't speak. So I stopped talking. And it's like, we don't realize, even in a moment, to listen, really, really listen to what our kids are asking us or saying to us, or how closely they watch our behaviors. And if you choose not to lead them and give them direction and give them guidance, they're looking for it. You are their only parent. They're only ones. They look to you for everything. They want to have a relationship with you because they figure you brought them into the world for a reason. And that isn't to be a tax credit or to be something to entertain you later in life. They want a relationship with you now. So listen and educate them. I think a lot of us as parents get wrapped up in our own world, and we forget it's not about us. Somewhere along the line, we got this idea with culture and society, it's about us. It's not.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It is so true. It's not about us. Our job as parents is to lay down our lives for our kids. It's not to, have these little toys that we can play with when we want as children. No, it's very, very crucial that we do the right. You teach the children well. Remember that old song that came out of the 60s? Teach the children well. And we have dropped the ball as a culture. In the public school systems, and some of the charter school systems, it's just an outright mess. And so if your kid comes out anti-God, anti-truth, can't think for themselves, then that's on you, ladies and gentlemen. It really is. But these rights, divorced from responsibilities, is the issue. And the final thing I'll say is, just to put another exclamation the point on this, evil doesn't have rights. So that smut should not get in. And you and I should stand up together and say, no, not in this system. Or we pull our kids out. What happens in the Brookings system if all the parents pull their kids out? Then what?
The school gets really, really rich because we still got to pay property taxes.
It's going to get weird.
It'll get really weird.
Final thoughts.
At the end of the day, as dismissed and removed from this process of education you might believe you are, take this from step one. If you own a home in your school district, a portion of your property taxes goes to pay for that public school entity. It is matched by monies from the federal, which come out of your payroll. So if you go to a job and you're a W-2 employee and you pay federal taxes, at the end of the year, part of that money that you pay goes back to education. So you are paying for the end product. If this was your cell phone and you got really crappy service, you would call the corporation and you would raise holy hell until your cell phone and your internet worked the way it's supposed to. If it was food you got from a restaurant tonight to feed your family, or a package of steaks from the butcher shop that you're going to feed your family tonight, and it didn't look right, smell right, and it was rotten, you would complain about it. So don't remove yourself so far from this process that you can't smell something foul and rotten and call it out. And recognize that you may not be the one vocal enough or brave enough to go say something, but talk to your neighbor, talk to friends, and see if there's a consensus. Reason together if there's a consensus here. Because if there is, someone needs to stand up and say something is rank in the state of Denmark.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, remember you are loved. May God strengthen the
Bars of your gates.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Glen Gower Podcast, sponsored by Mission Blueprint. Mission Blueprint is a nonprofit ministry started by Glenn and Jamie to sanctify the family. Our income is donation-based, and we need your help. Please support us financially by going to www.mission-blueprint.org and be a part of our financial team. Thank you, and may God strengthen the bars of your gate.